So welcome to Morning Star Northern Crown. This is a presentation that I've been super excited about the legendary Cretan princess and priestess Ariadne and the Corona Borealis, otherwise known as the Northern Crown. Melitta Nuccio is a mother, a doula, a teacher. She's the founder of the Mount Nysa Mystery School, which is dedicated to the study of ancient Mediterranean religion and the mysteries of classical antiquity. After receiving her degree in religious studies in 2016, she continued her postgraduate studies in ancient history and classical Greek with Southern Methodist University and HM Classics Academy, and is now with a child under the age of 2, also doing another master's degree, leading pilgrimages, teaching women. She's incredible. Her teachers have included myself here in the temple, Dr. Carla Ionescu of the Artemis Research Center. You might know her as Artemis Expert on Instagram. She's got many other teachers she's honored in the long line of women's wisdom that contributed to her path. She's served people all around the world with her retreats and pilgrimages. She and I are leading a group to Crete in 2.5 weeks. And she also does holistic birth work and postpartum care. You might remember her from our Go with Goddess Symposium last fall, where she presented about mothers traveling with children. She is dedicated to Hellenic religious education and traditional methods of divination. It's her prayer that each person who feels the call may be transformed by the mysteries of the divine, and in doing so, to help restore the sacred connection and healing with Yaya. So without further ado, I give you Priestess Bria. Welcome.
Thank you, Priestess Yasha. Goodness, I forgot I wrote such a long bio. Sorry you had to read all that, but thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm so excited to present this with you. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will talk about Ariadne. All right. So Ariadne, I wanted to begin by sharing this beautiful image by Tyler Miles Lockett, who I reached out. I've been following this artist for a while. He creates incredible art, and asked if I could use his image of Ariadne in this presentation because I thought it was just so incredible. And it captures so many aspects of Ariadne's myth. The closer you look, the more parts you'll find, but it also captured the constellation that she is associated with, which of course, when I heard the theme for this year's symposium, I knew that I wanted to talk about Ariadne because she is often overlooked. So without further ado, we have to go back to the origins of her mythology in Greece and Rome. Many of you are probably familiar with Ariadne's most famous aspect of myth, which is the legend of the Minotaur with Theseus. This is one piece of her story, but to talk about that just briefly, we have to talk about her mother. Ariadne was born to King Minos of Crete, the island of Crete. This is in fact where we get the word Minoan civilization, referring to the Bronze Age civilization, primarily upon the island of Crete. And she is also the daughter of Pasiphae, who is herself a goddess, the daughter of Helios, the sun. So she's got quite an impressive lineage. Pasiphae is famous for being a sorceress, along with her sister Kirke or Circe. And she is the mother of the Minotaur, who is Ariadne's half-brother, as it were. So how did this come to be? Well, there are many different versions of events. The most famous touches upon the fact that King Minos had some unsavory aspects, as is common within mythology. And he, through whatever events, managed to anger the god Poseidon. Usually in versions was saying that he had this beautiful white bull and he tried to trick Poseidon so that he would not have to give up this bull. And so he put a different bull in the place of this beautiful white bull and tried to trick the god. If you know anything about ancient Greece, you know hubris is a big no-no. It is probably the biggest sin you can commit. So King Minos really messed up there. And as is so common in patriarchal myth, the woman ended up getting the blame for it or getting the punishment. And in this case, Pasiphae was cursed with lust for this beautiful bull. And she commissioned the famous inventor Daedalus to build this contraption so that she could mate with the bull. This led to the conception and the birth of this monstrous creature, half bull, half human, the Minotaur. And instead of slaying this beast, King Minos used it as a weapon and a point of pride and kept this beast locked up beneath the earth in a great labyrinth, also built by Daedalus. And each year, as he had dominion, basically, or had defeated Athens in battle, he would demand tribute of boys and girls to come every year to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. So that is the backdrop of the whole story that Ariadne comes into. And she is, as a royal princess, also very likely would have been involved in religion. As Yesha mentioned, she was probably a priestess as a royal woman, and she was very much involved with these sacrifices. So once she was a little grown, she managed to set her eyes upon one of these tributes who arrived. His name was Theseus, and immediately she fell in love with him. Now, Theseus was the son of the Athenian king, Aegeus, and this is in fact where we get the word Aegean Sea. And she just was head over heels. And he decided he was going to put a stop to these sacrifices, to this dominion over his people, and go down and kill the Minotaur. Now, if you know anything about the story, you know it's not so much going down, finding the Minotaur and slaying him that's the problem. It's getting out of the maze, getting out of the labyrinth. This is where Ariadne is really the heroine of the story. She is the reason that Theseus was triumphant, and how she helped him was by giving him a yarn, basically a ball of yarn, a thread, so that he could tie it from the upstairs and go down to this maze and then be able to come back up, find his way out. And that is in fact what happened. He did slay the Minotaur with her help, really because of her, and came back up. As you can imagine, he needed to get out of Dodge once he had slain the Minotaur, because King Minos wasn't going to be too happy. And in fact, Ariadne was also now in jeopardy. She was going to have to leave because she had betrayed her family as well. So it was really important that she leave with Theseus, and she thought that she was going to marry him in Athens. Now, there are a number of ways that Ariadne's story diverts from here. However it may be, she finds herself stranded on an island called Naxos and left by Theseus. There are many different versions of events. Some say that she was pregnant by Theseus at this point and died in childbirth. Some say that they were caught upon the island, and
Denver summer right now. It's like, yeah, I quit drinking for 2 months. Like, any reason? It's like, yeah, you know, like every couple of years, I just do a couple months just to make sure.
I was thinking maybe my
It's like I've been like,
But they smoke, but he smokes.
yeah, he still smokes, but Denver drinks a lot.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Just one moment while I sort this out. Maybe Mia can help me.
No worries.
Oh. Okay, I think we're good to
Okay.
come back in. Okay, go ahead, Bria.
Thank you. So however it may be, some of the other versions say that she was intimate with Theseus on the island. She was caught by Dionysus, killed by Artemis for trespassing in a sacred space. And then most versions of events actually say, and I tend to agree, that more likely Theseus abandoned her. And this is the version of events that Ovid takes, the famous Roman poet takes. He was particularly not a fan of Theseus, and I'll share some of his words because he's really a fan of Ariadne and he does not like Theseus. So some poets took this turn to say that she was abandoned. And then others say that, in fact, the Greek god Dionysus compelled Theseus to leave her because he had fallen in love with Ariadne. So she's abandoned on this island. Theseus leaves, goes back to Athens. His story does not end so happily either. He ends up marrying Ariadne's sister Phaedra, which ends in quite tragedy. His father jumps from the cliff on Athens into the sea because Theseus did not change his sails. So he thinks that his son has died. And so all these events actually unfold very tragically for him as well. For Ariadne, her story gets a little happier. She is taken by Dionysus, and again, how that happens, there are different versions, but she ends up marrying him happily, becoming the wife of the Greek god. And many versions say that they had several sons together, if not many sons, and that she was part of his mysteries with other women. And there are also other versions, several versions of her death. How did she die? Because at this point, she is mostly a mortal woman. So different versions say that she was killed in battle when Dionysus went into battle against the city of Thebes. There are versions saying that she simply died a mortal death. Whatever it was, right? Many different versions. In any case, Dionysus throws her wedding crown into the stars, and this is her famous constellation, the Corona Borealis, the northern crown, which immortalizes her and brings her, so to speak, into Olympus and deifies her. So she is a very prolific in Greek myth, in archaic, classical, Hellenistic, and Roman and beyond myth. We're going to talk about, though, what came before that. So just to recap some imagery, because she's a very famous figure of art, because her myth is just so colorful. This is Theseus and Ariadne with the yarn, with the thread, and this is Theseus slaying the Minotaur. And this is one of my favorite images of Ariadne and Dionysus, where they are wedded. And this is Ovid's recollection of their meeting. Now the god in his chariot, wreathed with vines, curbing his team of tigers with golden reins, the girl's voice and color, and Theseus all lost, to whom the god said, "See, I come, more faithful in love. Have no fear, Cretan, you'll be bride to Bacchus or Dionysus. Take the heavens for dowry, be seen as heavenly stars, and guide the anxious sailor often to your Cretan crown." And of this, he is speaking of her constellation in the sky. So really beautiful words. And by all accounts, shockingly, in Greek mythology, they have a happy marriage. And this is quite rare, as you probably know. So really cool. This is a beautiful image of Ariadne with Dionysus, and this is in fact her crown set in the sky. And here it is in the modern sky. It is a constellation found in the northern hemisphere, and it is near what many people call Boetes or Baetes. It is the smaller of the two for sure, but it might help you to orient. If you're looking, you might be able to find it by looking at this one. So I mentioned Ariadne's myth in later Greek and Roman culture, but as we all know, mythology in Greece and Rome did not just spring out of nowhere, right? It was oral tradition that was eventually written down. In Ariadne's case, being a Cretan goddess, where Bronze Age culture was so prolific, it is almost certain that there is some precedent for Ariadne far earlier. So here's a peculiar account from Plutarch, where he is talking about this account of Paeon the Amathusian, which is on Cyprus or Cyprus or Cyprus. He says that Theseus, driven out of his course by a storm to Cyprus, and having with him Ariadne, who was big with child and in sore sickness and distress from the tossing of the sea, set her on shore alone, but that he himself, while trying to succor the ship, was borne out to sea again. The women of the island accordingly took Ariadne into their care and tried to comfort her in the discouragement caused by her loneliness, brought her forged letters purporting to have been written to her by Theseus, ministered to her aid during the pangs of travail, and gave her burial when she died before her child was born. Paeon later says further that Theseus came back and was greatly afflicted and left a sum of money with the people of the island, enjoining them to sacrifice to Ariadne, caused 2 little statuettes to be set up in her honor, one of silver and one of bronze. He says also that at the sacrifice in her honor on the 2nd day of the month, Corpieus, one of their young men lies down and actually imitates the cries and gestures of women in travail. And he's talking about childbirth here. And that they call the grove in which they show her tomb the grove of Ariadne, Aphrodite. Some of the Naxians also have a story of their own, that there are 2 Minoses and 2 Ariadnes, one of whom they say was married to Dionysus in Naxos and bore him Staphylos and his brother, and the other of a later time, having been carried off by Theseus and then abandoned by him, came to Naxos, accompanied by a nurse, whose tomb they also show, and that this Ariadne also died there, and has honors paid her unlike those of the former, for the festival of the first Ariadne is celebrated with mirth and revels, but the sacrifices performed in honor of the second are attended with sorrow and mourning. Holy cow, what does that mean? Okay, so what Plutarch is hinting at here is that there are, in fact, upon the islands of Cyprus and Naxos, there is in fact an independent cult of Aphrodite, independent of Dionysus, right? Not just as his consort, his wife, and not just as a heroine in Theseus's story, but that she's being worshipped as a goddess in her own right. And particularly what the Naxians are saying is that, oh, our ancestors have told us that these are 2 different Ariadnes. We have the old Ariadne, the goddess Ariadne, who comes from a long, long, long time ago, who we worship. And we also have the legendary mythological Ariadne, who we have this whole mythology where she was abandoned as a princess by Theseus. She gave birth or died in childbirth, and then we honor her as a heroine. So they're actually saying these are 2 different goddesses, or 2 different figures, and that they worship both. But again, hinting that in fact Ariadne is far, far older than just this later Greek myth that is written down. So really interesting. And also I emphasize here the grove of Ariadne Aphrodite. What's happening there? This is a reconstruction, watercolor reconstruction of the temple at Amathus in Cyprus, and some of the symbols of Aphrodite here. Now, interesting to note, right? When we think about Aphrodite and her Roman counterpart Venus, we of course know that she is associated with the planet Venus. And so it's just interesting that these 2 figures are being conflated here, Aphrodite and Ariadne, when they are both figures associated with the sky, Venus being called the morning and the evening star by the ancients, the brightest star in the sky. Of course, we now know it's a planet, but this idea, right, that this is a star in the sky, a point in the sky, a goddess in the sky that we can call upon. We saw that Ariadne was called upon by sailors, perhaps for safety or for navigation or both, and the same thing with Venus. So that is really interesting to me. The primitive nature of this cult at Amathus, it appears to be much older than the Athenian sanctioned shrine of Aphrodite, the more popular one, right? Who actually received Ariadne as an epithet. In this case, Ariadne means sacred. So there is some speculation, you know, that this is a name, it's an epithet, it's both. We don't really know, but there are enough clues. Ariadne's central place to come in heroic myth, her central place in the celestial sphere, her central place in Aegean island cult. It suggests that she was around for a long time, right? So that leads us to ask, who really is Ariadne? What's in a name? This is where we can really parse out what is going on here. Who is she? Ariadne, it is a really interesting name. It's unusual for Greek mythology. Greek lexicographers, is that how you say it? Lexicographers, that's a mouthful, in the Hellenistic period claimed that Ariadne is derived from the ancient Cretan dialectical elements are, most, and adnos, holy. So most holy, okay? Conversely, Stylianos Alexio has argued that despite the belief that Ariadne's name is of Indo-European origin, it is actually pre-Greek. The linguist Robert S.P. Beeks has also supported Ariadne having a pre-Greek origin, specifically being Minoan from Crete, because her name includes the sequence DN. Rare, this is very rare in Indo-European languages, and it's an indication that it could be a Minoan loanword. Carl Karenyi and Robert Graves theorized that Ariadne, whose name they thought derived from this enumeration of Adnon, a Cretan Greek form of utterly pure, was perhaps a great goddess of Crete herself, the first divine personage of Greek mythology to be immediately recognized in Crete. Once archaeological investigation began, Karenyi observed that her name was merely an epithet, again, that most holy or sacred, and claimed that she was originally the mistress of the labyrinth, both a winding dancing ground and, in Greek opinion, a prison with the dreaded Minotaur in its center. And this is interesting. If you've been to the palace at Knossos in Crete, there is no labyrinth to be found, right? You're probably wondering, where is the labyrinth? Well, it's not there. And it's very likely that this palace was sprawling. And if you go there, you'll see that it's sprawling. There's so many rooms. It's likely that the later Greeks, the Mycenaeans and the later Greeks thought, wow, this place is like a maze, right? And that this is part of where this whole labyrinth idea comes from. And again, also the forms of dancing, the traditions of dancing that were significant to the Minoans. Karenyi explained that a linear B inscription from Knossos to all the gods, honey, to the mistress of the labyrinth, honey, in equal amounts implied to him that the mistress of the labyrinth was a great goddess in her own right. Professor Barry Powell even suggested that she was the great snake goddess of Minoan Crete. So all these different theories, I'm not going to argue for any which one here. I'm just sharing what are some of the ideas because there are many, and understandably so. So this is, I have my own reconstruction of the famous snake goddess, sometimes thought to be a priestess of the goddess from Minoan Crete. And then this is actually my figurine of Ariadne herself. So you can see she is in the Minoan style of dress. She has the Minotaur, the bull here on her apron. She has the yarn or the thread. And I just was so excited when I found this version of Ariadne because it really touches upon her culture. when it comes to this central legend, right, of Ariadne and the Minotaur, this can really easily be traced back to Bronze Age Crete because the bull was particularly venerated in Minoan civilizations. Sacred bulls can be found everywhere, most strikingly in these depictions of bull leaping or bull dancing that is depicted in frescoes. This incredible sport and religious ritual of mounting and flipping over the bull, which would have been, as you can imagine, incredibly dangerous. But this was very likely a religious ritual to honor the bull, the life force of the divine masculine. And again, Karenni is saying the bull game was a repetition of the original capture of the wild bull before days of domestication. From it developed the acrobatic art of the Minoan toreros. The Minoan bull game was clearly a festive game. In honor of whom? The great goddess of nature and life. Nicolaus Platon drew this inference from his interpretation of Minoan art. In his view, the goddess was the divine onlooker. Again, a theory here, right? That tracing the threads, not saying that this is for sure the case, but this is Karenni's hypothesis in his book on Dionysos. And that brings us to more as stars, right? More constellations that are connected to the myth of Ariadne. In this case, the bull of heaven. Interestingly, the word minotaur itself derives from minotauros, which is a compound of minos and then the noun tauros, which is bull. So literally, minotauros means the bull of Minos, but that's not actually his name. In Crete, the minotaur was known as Asterion or Asterios, and this literally means the starry one. Why would that be? Well, we could probably guess why. Pasiphae herself was thought to be an early Cretan moon goddess, almost like the later classical Selene. Both her bull lover and her minotaur son were, of course, associated with the constellation Taurus. It should come as no surprise then that Dionysos was also heavily associated with the bull. He has many epithets related to the bull, including Tauros, and he was said to prefer the sacrifice of bulls. So here we have a depiction of the sacred bull of Minoan civilization with the labyrinth in the center, the stars, right? The bull of heaven here. And these are the horns of consecration that have been restored at the palace of Knossos in Crete. And you can see they are massive. So this was very likely an altar. And we see also the double labrys, the double-headed axe over and over and over again in Crete. And these are thought to call back to the moon and also the bull horns. The bull of heaven is a concept that we could spend all day on, but if you are familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh, you'll know that this concept goes back even further in the ancient Near East with Ishtar and Gilgamesh. She famously unleashed the bull of heaven upon Gilgamesh after he rejected her advances. So interestingly, that she brought down the Taurus from the sky. So what else do we have that hint at these earlier findings for Ariadne? Well, there is a temple on the island of Chios. We know that Dionysus was a god in much earlier time. We know this because he is attested in Linear B script. Once that was decoded, that blew people's mind because people thought that Dionysus was a foreign god that came to Greece much later. In fact, he is one of the oldest Greek gods. And here we could argue Ariadne as well. So we can see Dionysus prefigured on certain seal rings as actually the other way around, him as the consort of the goddess, who was presumably reduced in stature by the patriarchal Greeks to the mythological heroine Ariadne, while the consort was raised to a god. We have good reason to see him prefigured in the Adirond youth, since we find a shrine of Dionysus directly descended from a shrine of the goddess and preserving a pious memorial to her. A late literary reference, which may go back to an early source, connects Ariadne with yet another island here, Chaos. The Scholiast to Theocritus, in commenting on the passage where Theseus is said to have abandoned Ariadne on Dia, as opposed to Naxos, says that actually many islands are called Dia and names 6, among which is the peninsula of Chaos. It seems likely that a cult of Ariadne was once strong on the islands, and that she was identified with the Minoan Mycenaean goddess Dia, whom we find named on the Linear B tablets as well. Those islands where the cult was particularly strong preserved the name Dia in later times. The peninsula of Chaos was one of these. Aya Irini and its Bronze Age temple are situated on a peninsula in the northwest corner of the island. Even today, the whole island is popularly known as Dia or Sia. These chaos statues do not represent the figure we think of as Ariadne. They are obviously religious, not mythological, and Ariadne is a mythological character. The function of the chaos goddess cannot be as narrowly specified as can Ariadne's. Nevertheless, the conjunction here of a Dionysus and a female figure handed down directly from the Bronze Age goddess and her consort, and the great likelihood of the identification of the temple area with the location of Ariadne's abandonment suggest that the mythological figure Ariadne is descended from the religious figure of the goddess, and that in a Bronze Age fertility cult of her abandonment, sleep and rescue by the New Year god was in fact practiced. So this was the research of Robert Eisner back in 1972. I was so thrilled to find this article because what an incredible connection here. Again, not that we can say anything for certain that this was a direct evolution, but there are so many links. And here are some of those statues that he is referencing. You can see they have this Minoan style to them, right? The exposed breasts, the heavy belt or girdle necklace, positioning of the arms. One of the other famous statues like this, she has her arms out just like this with snakes wrapped around. So it's interesting that these are the goddess statues then associated with the prefigured Dionysus. And in fact, there is the original snake goddess here, just to draw the parallels. So to conclude here with Karenni and his hypothesis, Dionysus is the god of Zoe, which is defined as life experienced without end, as infinite life. So he goes through all this hypothesis, the Cretan prelude, Minoan visions, the Dionysian atmosphere found in Minoan art, light and honey exploring various myths about apiculture and honey, tracing them back to presumed ritual brewing of mead at the time of the New Year, the Cretan core of the Dionysus myth, attempting to reconstruct the historical development of such figures as Iacchos, Ariadne, the Minotaur, and Dionysus himself. A typical conclusion in the union of two archetypal images, the divine pair, Dionysus and Ariadne, represent the eternal passage of Zoe into and through the genesis of living creatures. Now, I have to say, that Hardy Hansen here in his review of this book did not particularly agree with the conclusion of Karenni. I would be remiss if I did not say that, but he did appreciate the hypothesis here and acknowledge that there are many, many prefigurations of this myth in Minoan culture, suggesting that, yes, Dionysus and Ariadne have very much a much earlier connection. So as I was putting together the final touches to talk about the constellation here of Ariadne, the Corona Borealis, imagine my surprise when 3 days ago this article was posted. Sometime this year, the night sky will get a brand new star that will be visible with the naked eye, even in the city. The celestial light show will be the result of an explosive interaction between two neighboring stars that occur every 80 years. Located in the Northern Crown constellation, T Coronae Borealis is a pretty average-looking star most of the time. With a brightness of about magnitude +10, it's right on the limits of what you could see with a pair of binoculars. And even if you do go looking, there's not much to see. At least that's the case for about 79 out of 80 years. But on that 80th year, the star suddenly brightens drastically up to around magnitude +2, which puts it on par with the northern star Polaris. That makes it one of the brightest stars in the night sky, easily visible with the naked eye, even when washed out by city lights. This once-in-a-lifetime outburst last occurred in 1946, and before that in 1866. And lo and behold, it is 2 years ahead of schedule, with astronomers predicting it will flare up again between March and September of this year. It'll be a bright new star for a few days with the naked eye and a little over a week with binoculars before it settles down for another few decades. So I thought how fitting that Ariadne is coming back to life, right? She's making herself known, as she often does, as she has enduringly throughout these centuries and millennia, over and over and over again. She endures, and she is a bright goddess in her own right. So that is my presentation today. I don't know if we have time for any Q&A, if there is any question, but thank you very much for listening.
We don't have a time for Q&A, but I'm sure people are curious. I want to just say how magical, Bria. I'm actually going to be with Priestess Red Fox at the temple of Aphrodite Ariadne at Amathus in about 10 days. And I'll get a rock from there and I'll bring it to Crete, where then I'll give it to you to take. And we together will scan the night sky in early April for this new coronal explosion. I'm thrilled about this. I want to say thank you so much for this incredibly valuable research. We will be, I'll be gathering a PDF of the slides from this talk so that when we post the video of this talk, people can look at the slides along with it. And thank you, Priestess Bria.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so, yeah. I just said that.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay, I'm gonna stop my recording.